and we live and move and have our story. In love, God lives in us and makes us whole. Oh, Jesus, may we hear the word that calls us near. Your story makes a home within our soul. Your story makes a home within our soul.
Welcome to StoryFest. The Bible, is full of stories about people on the outside looking in, about people who have been ignored or persecuted or just plain down and out, but people who find themselves welcomed into God's community of love. And the best example of that is Jesus himself. Now think about it. He was born in a little jerkwater town that most people had never heard of, at least at that time. And he was a Jew, and the Jews at that time were under the thumb of Rome. They were an occupied country. He was executed as a common crook on the city's garbage dump, and that should have been the end of that. But here we are, 2,000 years later, and he turns out to have been the most influential person that ever lived. Now, maybe that's why it's not surprising that during his life, Jesus was forever cheering for the underdog. The story of Zacchaeus is a prime example. Zacchaeus worked for the occupying army, the Roman army, as a tax collector, and that branded him as a traitor and a crook, even though he may not have been either. He was so short he had to climb a tree just to get a look at Jesus, and the people all around hated him. But Jesus invited himself to Zacchaeus' house for lunch. Jesus changed a nobody into a somebody. So let's check out the story as we find it in the Bible. Telling us the story is Allison Rennie.
Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He wanted to see who Jesus really was, but could not on account of the crowd and because he was short of stature. He ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree where he could see him, because he was going to pass by that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." Zacchaeus hurried down and was happy to welcome him. Now, everyone who saw this grumbled and said, "He is going to be a guest at a sinner's home." Zacchaeus stood there and said to Jesus, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give away. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times what I owe." Then Jesus said, "Today, salvation has come to this house, for he is too a son of Abraham. For the human one came to save those who are lost."
So what did Zacchaeus look like? Well, aside from being short, we have no description at all. And Don McNair must have been getting a bit tired of having us give him these tough assignments, but we asked him, nevertheless, to do a drawing of Zacchaeus.
The interesting thing about this process is the things which I am seeing in the story, as well as in the images that I'm working with that I never saw before. The idea of Zacchaeus being in the midst of a crowd who despises him and making his plea to Christ, that's something I missed entirely from my previous understanding of the story. And also within the images themselves, the the idea of trying to find a man who is both fearful and determined. While he's crouching amidst men and women who are disgusted by him, he still makes his plea to the onlooker, who in this case isn't in fact you are the take the position of Christ, looking at him through the crowd.
So, who was this guy whom everybody loved to hate? Well, Donald Schmidt, he's the Bible scholar on our StoryFest team. He has a habit of seeing details in the story in different and interesting ways. It's just possible, he says, that Zacchaeus was trying hard to be honest and fair in a job that almost required him to be a crook. So Donald wrote a story about Zacchaeus, which the Reader's Theatre folks told to the people who were gathered in Summerland.
Okay, Donald. Why don't you pretend you're Zacchaeus and put yourself in his sandals and tell us the story from his point of view.
You likely already know who I am. My reputation always seems to precede me, and that's generally not been a good thing.
Hey, Zacchaeus. Good thing you got a long name to make up for being so short.
I used to laugh along with them over that, but over time people stopped saying much directly to me at all. It seems the only times I heard my name spoken, it was in someone else's conversation with some unprintable adjective in front of it. Zacchaeus. Occasionally, someone spat it out to me directly, again, usually in the midst of a string of insults.
Zacchaeus.
Most of the time, though, people who saw me in the streets or in the marketplace didn't quite know what to do with me. It seems they could never quite look me in the eye. Instead, they'd give me a weary, pitiful glance and a tepid half-smile.
Hello, Zacchaeus.
Then they'd quickly avert their eyes, praying that no one had actually seen them looking at this sorry excuse for a human being. If anyone did talk to me, it was businesslike and to the point, never any conversation. How I longed for someone to simply ask me how I was doing. Even some banal small talk, how wonderful it would be just to have someone say, "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Or, "Think the grain harvest will be good this year?" But it never happened. Not even my family wanted to admit that they knew me. Now you have to understand, it wasn't always this way. I started out well-liked. I used to be a real people pleaser. My sister used to say it was on account of being short that I tried so hard to please others, to get them to notice me. And maybe she's right. Only it never really worked for very long. As a teenager, I got a job running errands for the Romans. A few coins to carry messages around town, that sort of thing. The other kids would take their time, but I always hurried. It's not that I liked the Romans, you understand. I simply loved to get praise for doing a good job. Well, some years later, an opening came up in the tax department, and I leapt at the opportunity. You see, tax collectors were paid by commission in those days, and they could charge as much overhead as they wanted. It was a great way to make a living, but on the other hand, people despised tax collectors, called them dirt. And I wanted to be liked. So an idea came to me. Become a tax collector and be fair. That would be a switch. I'd pay the Romans the percentage they demanded, but I wouldn't charge as much commission as the others, and that way everybody would like me.
Fat chance.
What, like a tax collector?
Well, the Romans liked me all right. Because my rates were lower, people always paid me on time, and so I turned in a nice hefty bundle to the administrator every month. But all my fellow Jews hated me, assuming I was as corrupt as all the others.
Cheat.
Liar.
Snake.
Those were some of the nicer things they called me. Just when I was ready to pack it in, I got promoted to chief tax collector for the whole district. More prestige with the Romans, I thought, but more contempt from my own people. Was it worth it? One day there was a big commotion in town. It seems this Jesus fellow from Nazareth was coming. I'd heard about him. He had quite a following. Apparently he talked about justice and fairness and reclaiming our heritage as God's chosen people. Jesus also talked about tolerance and acceptance, and that interested me. I thought he might be worth checking out. It was hot, dusty, and heavy in town that day. The crowd started gathering early, and by the time Jesus arrived, you couldn't get anywhere near the road. Wanting to at least catch a glimpse of him, I climbed up the nearest tree. To be honest, I was kind of disappointed. Jesus looked quite, normal. People were crowding around him, waving and grasping at his clothes, and he smiled and held first one hand and then another, and then Jesus noticed me up in the tree. I waved. Didn't quite know what else to do, really. And he looked straight at me.
You're Zacchaeus, aren't you? I've heard about you.
If I could have melted away, I would have. But you can't really do that when you're up in a tree and there's a huge crowd around staring at you. So I decided to climb down and speak my piece. If Jesus wanted to dress me down in front of all these people, it was time to set the record straight. I don't care what you've heard, I said. It's nothing but a pack of lies. The crowd went silent. I've always charged less commission than the other tax collectors and always given 1/2 of my earnings to care for the poor. Jesus didn't say a word, so I just kept right on talking. What's more, on the rare occasions when I have accidentally cheated somebody, I've paid them back 4 times over. But does anybody care about that? No. They say that because I work for the Romans, I'm a cheat and a good-for-nothing, and if you've come here to tell me the same thing, Jesus, you can save your breath, because I have heard it all before. Jesus smiled a gentle little smile, and he reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. I was shaking.
Zacchaeus, I know how kind and fair you are. I've also heard that you make a wonderful fish stew, and I'm very hungry. Could you give my friends and me a little lunch and a place to sit down? We could use a rest.
I blushed. I tried to get my shocked face to cooperate for a smile.
And as for your reputation, all I know is that you are a child of Abraham who tries to live a good life. I'd be proud to call you my friend.
Now, I would never brag about my fish stew, but I will tell you that Jesus and his crew finished all that I could make, and they ate my bread and cheese and drank my wine, and we all had a few laughs. That evening in the market square, a crowd gathered to hear Jesus tell stories. It was the most wonderful night of my life. From that day on, people treated me with a new respect.
That's Zacchaeus, the one Jesus visited.
I even managed to convince a couple of others who worked for the Romans to plan strategy with me so we could do our jobs and satisfy the government without ripping people off. It really is amazing how easy it is sometimes to be just and fair if you only put your mind to it. I've come to realize what people mean when they say that they're saved. It's that sense of knowing that you belong, that God loves you and accepts you and cares about you despite what other people might think. Salvation came to me that day, the person of Jesus of Nazareth. It came in the form of friendship.
The question we keep asking you in these StoryFest videos is this: how do you relate to the story? How does it connect with your life? I found myself thinking about how hard it is to be a Christian in business when so many decisions seem to require that you make really questionable choices, and sometimes you are tempted, maybe even required, to do things that are downright evil. So I was surprised to hear how Allison connected in several ways with the story.
Jesus entered Ottawa and was passing through it. And there was a man there named Bill Morneau, who was a chief tax collector and was rich. I keep on playing that story over in my mind, thinking about him, actually, these days. How do we be good people? But actually, when I first heard we were going to do Zacchaeus, I was so thrilled because one of my all-time favorite songs growing up, Medical Mission Sisters, Bring It On. For Zacchaeus, he was small, but the Hebrews, they were tall, and the Lord loved Zacchaeus better than them all. And as a short person, quite apart from the terrible message in there that stereotypes Hebrews as tall people somehow, Zacchaeus, I was short, and I still am pretty short. And I didn't care about tax collecting and all that other stuff. I connected with there's somebody short. Their thing is they're trying to see. And as a short person still, I don't even like going to movie theaters because there's always somebody like Ralph sitting in front of me. And they're wide and they're tall. And so I used to love to sing that Medical Mission song. And I listened to it on YouTube just earlier this week in preparation, and it's got this kind of groove to it. It's really great. Do you remember? It's on the Joy is Like the Rain album, if anyone wants to look it up. So, I mean, all of that comes back. What happened there? I could see myself in Scripture. And honestly, we've done a lot of stories in these StoryFests, and it seems like every one of them, there's a woman, and what is she doing? She's having a baby. Oh, like it's just like, can she have? No, she's too old to have a baby, and she's too young to have a baby. It's all about women having babies, and I can identify with that. Like, as an experience, it's not something that's happened to me, and it would take a supernatural miracle of tremendous proportions for it to happen now. So I struggle to connect with those women who I'm supposed to identify with. And here comes Zacchaeus, a short person, perfect. But deeper than that, I mean, what is that really about? Here's Zacchaeus climbing up a tree so he can see. But what happens is he's seen. He wants to see better, but he doesn't realize in doing that he's exposing himself and becoming vulnerable to everybody's looking in a way that, however, if we think he's a good person or a not good person, isn't where I connect. It's more being seen in the act of trying to see. And so I want to bring into the room a mentor of mine, Sue Laverty, who saw me. She was crazy and wonderful and impulsive and goofy and serious. And I wanted to see her more. I wanted to see, so I came close. And then she started seeing me. And because of who she saw in me, I could start stepping into my life in a way that brings me here. Sue's love of story, she saw that in me too. A while ago, I did a rewrite of Zacchaeus, and I wrote this line where there was kind of prayers interspersed with retelling parts of the story, and the line was, God calls me to climb out of my tree and into my true self. And because I was seen by Sue, I was able to do that. So there's one of the places, well, there's 3 places I connect with that story.
One of the best ways to connect with a story is to tell another story. And we heard the story from the Bible as told by Allison, and then we heard Donald's story of Zacchaeus done by the Readers Theater Group. But another way is to take the scripture story and retell the same passage, but use your own words. It's called a paraphrase. And it's surprising how much you can learn by doing this. Allison Rennie wanted to get more on the inside of the Zacchaeus story, so she wrote her own paraphrase.
Jesus went into the city of Jericho. There was a man living there named Zacchaeus. He was top executive in the Roman tax collecting office, and so he was very wealthy. Zacchaeus was very short. He really wanted to get a good look at Jesus, but the crowd got in the way, and he couldn't see over people's heads. He saw a sycamore tree just down the road, and he ran ahead and climbed up into it so he could see Jesus. When Jesus came down the road, he looked up and saw Zacchaeus. "Zacchaeus," he called, "can we have lunch at your house today?" Well, Zacchaeus almost fell out of the tree. He was delighted to have Jesus at his house. But many of the people standing around didn't think it was so wonderful. What's he doing? Is he going to spend time with that crook? But Zacchaeus stood there, blinking his eyes, a little bit stunned. Then he blurted out, "Master, I give half of everything I earn to the poor people, and if I've defrauded anybody, I pay them back 4 times what I took." Then Jesus smiled at Zacchaeus. He looked up and spoke to the crowd. "Salvation has come to this man's house today. This is what it means to be a child of Abraham and Sarah, and my calling is to restore that which is lost."
Well, I mentioned earlier that I identified with Zacchaeus around the problem of wanting to run a successful business using Christian ethics and a sense of caring for the people you worked with and our customers. And at the Summerland event, I surprised myself. There I was, up on my hind legs, telling folks about my problem as a Christian business person.
Bev and I and Jim and Joan Taylor, many years ago, we tried to start it and work it as a Christian business. That means a Christian business meant that it was operated on some principles, but being a business, it also had to make a profit. I mean, if it didn't make a profit, it would simply go down. And we were constantly faced with problems of not knowing just how to do that. Problem, just one, for instance, there was a young man on the staff who was a very nice young man, a good young man, but he was somewhat handicapped, and his production, what he was doing, was costing the business money, and we were always sort of on the edge of bankruptcy. There were dozens of times when we had books that we wanted to publish because they were good books, they were important books, but we knew darn well they'd lose money. So what do? Donald has given me a whole new perspective on this story of seeing this is a story about the problems of a person who is in a secular employment trying to be a good person and to make the choices and to do the things that are right.
Well, you know, there are no easy answers. There are no clear-cut solutions. Zacchaeus had lunch with Jesus, and I'm sure he became a follower, but that didn't make things easier for him. But it did, I think, give him a strong sense of how he would live his life and run his business. It was like the decision we made when we began Woodlake Productions, and it complicated all kinds of business decisions, but in the end, it was the thing that gave power and meaning and purpose and a sense of joy to the whole operation. So, I was delighted when Linnea Good asked us to sing a song that kind of focuses on that basic decision. It's a song that comes from India, written by Simon Marak, who decided to become a Christian even though it cost him his life.
I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. The world behind me, the cross before me, the world behind me, the cross before me.
Again, I urge you to think about the stories you heard on this video and, if possible, talk about them with a friend. If you watch the program by yourself, well then invite your friend to come over and watch it again with you so you can talk about it together. I'm sure you're impressed with the fine songs Linnea Good has offered to us in this StoryFest series. Linnea has written and performed a magnificent body of fine faith music, and I would strongly suggest that you check it out. Look at her website so you can see the riches that are available there. It's wonderful. And if you'd like a copy of Donald's story about Zacchaeus or Allison's paraphrase of the Bible story, just go to the Woodlake Productions website. Those are free. All you have to do is download them. And while you're on that website, check out this book, The Gift of Story here. It sprang out of the StoryFest events, and it can enrich that experience for you. It's a fun read. You might also want to check out some of the other books I've written, far too many probably, but hey, I'm a compulsive storyteller. That's who I am. That's what I do. I can't help it. My late friend Glenn Baker once called me a step-down transformer. You see, what I like to do is take the difficult language and obscure writings of theologians and church leaders and put them into language and into stories which us normal human beings can digest. Now, a final thought. Think of yourself as Zacchaeus up in that tree. You're looking down out of that tree, and there's Jesus calling you to climb down, and he's asking to come into your life. Hey, it's an invitation that's there for everybody, for you, for me, everyone. No exceptions.
Your story makes a home within our soul.